Welcome to another episode of the Commerce Lab by Ecomcy, the place to everything related to Amazon FBA and e-commerce. My name is Vincenzo Toscano, CEO of Ecomcy. Today we bring you another special guest. His name is Reuben Mattinson, and he's the CEO and founder of RGM Tax Exemption, which is an agency that helps you with everything related to sales tax and company registration. And actually, that's gonna be our topic today. Our topic is gonna be around company registration and everything that has to do with sales tax, specifically in the USA. Now, without any further delay, let me introduce you, Reuben. How you doing today?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Vincenzo. Pleasure to be here. I'm loving your setup in the background as well. I feel like I could have made more of an effort than just my panda.
Yeah.
It's great to
Thank
be
you.
here,
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we have been trying to invest more into the podcast. So that's why I guess people have seen the evolvement from having nothing on the wall. Now you see all this professional, like soundproof and things like that. But I mean, it's everything around bringing the best quality to the audience. So that's what we try to do. But anyway, I want to first, of course, thank you for coming to the podcast. I know you have extensive experience on everything that has to do with company and tax registration in the USA. And of course, before we jump into that, which is going to be today's topic, I want you to give you some minutes so you can introduce yourself more in depth about who you are, how you got started into the e-commerce, and of course, how that brought you to open the agency related to sales support to Amazon sellers.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I personally started in the journey of e-commerce about 3 years ago, maybe just over that. Doing my own store on Amazon, selling various products, and doing all of the usual courses, cramming my head with as much info as I could. And through doing that process, just realized how tricky it was particularly to set up to sell on the US platform. And being a non-US client myself at the time as well, being even trickier to do that. So I was in a lot of groups at the time. Excuse my alarm. I was in a lot of groups at the time, and people started to reach out to me because they saw what I was doing and asking for help, really, and just realized there was a big need for help in that space of setting up, jumping through the right hoops to be protected, to be looked after as a business. And just kind of quite quickly, really, at the time, went about building a really good team who could support people and do that, and kind of just grew from there and snowballed from there. So, as you were saying, we really specialize now in sales tax compliance, sales tax exemption, company formation, and all that kind of stuff on any platform in the US space. And worked with thousands of clients now all over the world. It's been a bit of a roller coaster the last 3 years.
That's great. I mean, thank you. Yeah, I think what you're doing is great because the reality is that everything gets so scared when you speak about sales tax in the USA. As soon as you mentioned you need to register in all the states and the compliance and everything, I think that's a great service to provide because I think that most of the people that want to sell in the USA, the number one barrier is always sales tax and company registration. So I think that is great. Which is actually gonna bring me now to one of my first questions, so we can jump right away into the topic, which is what is usually the advice you provide for international people, which I would think is the majority when jumping to USA, in terms of a company structure when it comes to a USA. What is usually your advice on that?
Yeah, so typically what we would do is we would form a US LLC for a non-US client, typically in a state like Wyoming where there isn't any state tax, so they wouldn't pay any extra additional tax to the state. And we would form the company as what's called a foreign-owned disregarded entity. It's a bit of a mouthful. Just means that you shouldn't have to pay any tax to the US, but only in your country where you're based. Now, we go into loads of different complexities there because we're going into kind of touching on income tax more than sales tax there. And that's, looking at tax treaties between different countries. So from country to country within Europe, each of them has a different tax treaty with the US, and some are, pay 5% tax to the US, this amount to your home country. But typically, if you're set up properly, you won't be paying double taxation. You'll just be paying whatever tax is the cheapest, be it to either US or your home country. And as I say, we go about doing it through an LLC just because it's a total separate entity. You've got more presence in the US, so you can have better connections with suppliers, easier registration with states when needed, and relatively cheap to do as well, maybe about $100 a year to keep the LLC going. And yeah, it has a bit more protection for you as well, instead of just being an individual. So the company, takes more responsibility than just you yourself if you try to go about doing it as a sole trader.
That's great. Yeah, I also like the fact that you touch on the cost because I have the belief that a lot of people think that when you need to open a company in the USA is thousands and thousands of dollars. And I think
Mhm.
it's also, it comes from the misinformation. That's why we do this podcast, because I think it's great to bring the information to the community that it's not really that complex. And there is people like you out there that, I mean, I reckon you can do this within a few weeks, right? The whole registration for your clients, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, typically for like US clients, it's obviously a bit quicker. We can do it within about a week. For non-US clients at the moment, our turnover time is only really a couple of weeks to get the
That's great.
company formed, to get their EIN number as well. So
That's good.
that's, typically quicker than 90% of companies out there who would do the same service.
That's great. Good. So when it comes to a criteria in terms of international people that wants to open their company in the USA, is there any specific kind of documentation you would advise people before approaching to you that they should have in hand to make the process as smooth as possible?
Typically, it's fairly basic for information, which is good. Obviously, always good
Yeah.
news.
Yeah.
Again, people might think they need a ton of info. They
Yeah.
don't.
That's why. Yeah.
Um, I guess what speeds up the process a little bit, on occasion, for getting an EIN number as a non-international is having a passport.
Okay.
Scan of your passport. You don't need that, but it can speed it up a little bit. But besides that, it's just knowing really what business name you want your name to be under, what owners you want to be under the
Mhm.
business, and the percentage of ownership for each of those people. But besides that, you don't really need a great deal of information.
That's great. Good. Now, when it comes to, of course, registering the company, I also understand that most of the time it's advised to also step into what we call the sales tax registration, right? Which I
Mhm.
think is the next section I want to start touching on. When it comes to sales registration, the first question that of course comes to my mind, I bet a lot of people have that question as well, is there any minimum threshold that people should keep in mind before doing this registration, or do you advise to do the registration as soon as you have the company registered in the USA?
Yeah, so Nexus laws are quite complicated because they vary from state to state,
Yeah.
and they can be triggered according to different things. So, like Nexus in a state just means you need to register to that
Mm.
state,
Yeah,
and that can be triggered by a volume of sales in dollars, or it could be triggered by just a volume in units that you
that's
sell,
correct.
or it can actually just be triggered due to your presence in that state, or where your products are stored. Now, that last one, which I mentioned, product storage, is probably the biggest one, which
Yeah.
triggers things for FBA sellers in particular
Yeah.
on Amazon. So, actually, as an FBA seller, from day one, you're covered quite well by Amazon because they remit and give the sales tax back for the majority of the states. But there's just a few kind of exceptions at the moment
Yes.
of you not being covered. One of them, for example, is the state of Missouri isn't being
Yeah.
remitted, and this is from the time of this recording. Obviously, this could change
Yeah,
from
can
then
change, of
because
course.
it's an ever-changing environment. But
Yeah.
at the moment, Missouri isn't collected and remitted for. So if you're an FBA seller and you store products in warehouses in Missouri, because there are FBA warehouses on their soil, that gives you nexus with that state. So you need to register straight away, no matter how many sales
Yeah.
you're making and the volumes of sales that you're doing. So that's just one small example of that. And then there's a few other kind of catches as well, like California, for example, as a state, they legally require you to have what's called a reseller's permit. So if you sell to anyone in California, which I imagine you would do as such a massive state in the US selling there,
Yes.
and you need to also register there from day one as well. So that's not kind of volume or sales dependent. So there's little kind of things like that which people can quite easily miss and then not be protected as a business. And that's, I guess, where we come in to help
Yeah,
with.
and do the magic. Good, good. So that means when somebody wants to jump into USA, would you advise the best strategy is to try to register with all those states that are not covered by Amazon, or is better to start selling on Amazon and then see how sales start performing, where Amazon move your inventory around, and then do the registration? Because the question here comes that the more states, I guess, you do, that more expensive and more paperwork is going to get involved, right? So what is
Mhm.
usually the strategy around that when it comes to people?
Yeah, so to be honest, besides Missouri and California, and then their business state where their state is actually formed, there isn't any additional registrations which would be needed for Amazon. So it's not overly complicated, it's not overly expensive. So what we tend to do is we do that as soon as people register and set up, so they're protected and registered from day one. So it won't be the case that if their volume and sales shoots up, they then need to register to other states, because Amazon actually cover that.
Yeah,
So excuse me again from
that,
working from home during COVID
that's
time.
totally fine.
So basically, yeah, it's not that complicated. So we would recommend from day one get those states done. I mentioned the business state there, I briefly touched on. That's more if they've got US suppliers in the US,
Yeah,
and they want to kind of give a resale permit and certificate to that wholesaler to prove that ultimately they can buy and resell products and don't need to pay any sales tax to that supplier. So
yeah.
that's now touching on the exemption a little bit. But yeah, I would say get yourself covered ASAP.
That's great. Good. And I like the fact that you mentioned that Amazon is already doing the majority of the sales collection in all the marketplaces. So the question now comes to when somebody use a service like yours, right? All the documentation, I guess, you guys use is already within the Amazon account of the client. And what you guys do is taking all those reports and they do the consolidation and the reporting on their behalf, right? That's usually how it works.
Yeah, so we would just get user permission just for the sales reports, part of their account only, and then we would pull that info, put that through our software, and then we would do calculations and remittances just for those states. And because the good thing is typically they're only going to be registered as an FBA seller in particular with California and Missouri, and then maybe their business state as well, depending on the supplier. It's not a big cost really for us to do that bookkeeping, because fortunately we're not having to do it across 50 states, which would be a
Yeah.
bit crazy, which were the earlier days. I mean, FBA sellers right now don't know how good they've got it in comparison to when I started, and it was an absolute minefield.
Yeah,
But yeah, because of that, it makes it quite straightforward and simple for us to do that for them.
that's great. Now I know a lot of people that do Amazon. They also have their own website, right? Let's say Shopify. So I know things can get very messy if then, let's say, you have your inventory in Amazon and you use the fulfillment channel only on Amazon to fulfill, let's say, your sales on all different states because you get those sales through your website. So I guess if that starts to happen, right, you then need to, of course, register for each single state that you make the sales through your website. Is that correct?
Yeah, it gets a lot trickier at that point, because it's all then now
Yeah,
about the thresholds that you cross,
that's correct.
and also the warehouses where your products are stored. But typically, you'll look at having to register once you cross maybe 200 units of sales in one state,
Mhm.
$100,000 of units in the other. So again, I guess our service becomes even more valuable in that sense
Yeah,
at
for
that
sure.
point, because we would go in, we'd do the data crunching, and then we'd work out when thresholds were crossed, and then we would register states accordingly. So that's, when you were mentioning, do people have to do it all from day
Mm.
one? Well, as a Shopify seller, no, you would just do it as your volumes increase. And typically, if your volumes are increasing, you're doing well as a business. So you'd be quite happy to probably pay a small extra fee to register to those states to look after your business. But yeah, Shopify is a much more of a minefield, a complex one to kind of navigate. There's other platforms as well, obviously, in the States, like Walmart that people sell on, and even
That's
Facebook
correct.
Marketplace, and they actually cover the States like Amazon as well. It is just Shopify and people's personal websites where it's a lot trickier.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's why I wanted to make that question, because I know a lot of people nowadays want to diversify, and most people nowadays have a Shopify website. So I bet that when you
Yeah,
start getting those threshold, I mean, you go over those limits on all the states, it can become a nightmare to control efficiently, right?
yeah, yeah,
For
exactly.
sure.
Yeah.
Good. So now I want to start jumping into kind of advices that you could give to people when it comes to maybe sales tax efficiency or company registration. Do you have some maybe tips that you could give to people, or at least things to consider to avoid when doing the registration that can make things easier for them?
Yeah, so starting from the company side of things, as I touched on earlier, I think making sure you don't register with a state where you're also liable to pay state tax is
It's a
quite an
big one.
important thing to look at. Because, for example, if you register in California, you could be looking at
Yeah, crazy.
10% extra tax to pay to that state, even
Yeah,
if you're not even based in the US. So that's a good one to avoid, hence why I mentioned Wyoming. I think also like the registration fees for the state, LLC as well, because some states like Nevada possibly or others will charge you up to $500-$600 a year to form a
yeah,
company, whereas others are a lot cheaper. So I would say looking at that. I guess some people would kind of argue that some states have better protection than others, like legally. If you're registering with the likes of Wyoming, they're very common and well versed with e-commerce sellers and the structure of their businesses, so you'll be pretty well protected. So that's from the company side of things. From again the state registration, it's more just about your peace of mind and your business being protected, and looking at your scenario on a client by client basis, depending on which marketplace you sell on, and the volume that you do. The situation will be different for everybody, but obviously we can only advise for you just to be
yeah,
protected as much as you can and as soon as possible, because the worst case scenarios we've seen play out where people have had these huge sales tax bills coming through the post from states,
yeah, yeah,
50,000 dollars even,
yeah,
and no one wants that to happen. So yeah,
yeah,
look
for
after
sure.
yourself.
Good, good. So yeah, I mean, I think today we have covered quite a bit. Very good questions. I think the last question would be: do you think there is something related to company registration or sales tax that we haven't touched that you would like to cover, or you think we have covered like the most important bit for your audience? Just to conclude.
Yeah, I think we've covered the majority of it really. I would say the only other kind of slight holdback for non-US clients we didn't touch on is maybe having like a bank account, to be
Yes,
able to plug
that's
that
great.
into the Amazon account to be paid by, or to maybe even buy from suppliers. Because if you don't have a US account, then you get paid, a foreign transaction fee to even
Yeah,
be paid by Amazon or even to buy from suppliers. So um, ultimately, we help people do that as well, non-US clients, to get US bank accounts, and there's
that's good.
different ways around that. But also having a US company registered and an EIN registered is the starting point for you to be able to get a bank
The
account.
bank account.
That's another advantage of doing that in the first place as well.
That's great. And when it comes to opening these bank accounts for people overseas, is it usually a process that takes a long time, or I guess it depends on some of the nationality or things like that, right? Usually.
Yeah, it can take a while. I mean, we have an affiliate, partnership with a bank
That's
that we go to help people get
that's great.
formation. So when we do it, we typically would get one turned over within maybe 2 to 4 weeks,
Good.
which again is pretty quick,
Yeah,
on
it's
the
good. It's good.
scheme of things. But yeah, you depending on the bank that you go to, the connections you have, you can have a bit of a nightmare with it, and
Yeah, they are very picky, I know. So that's why.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and take months to get through. So yeah, it varies.
Good. So well, I think that's a great last question to conclude today's episode. I mean, first of all, of course, I want to thank you for coming. I'm dropping all this knowledge. I know a lot of people is gonna feel more relief when it comes to jump into USA, especially people from Europe. They're always scared that when they hear sales tax and all that, they don't want to jump into the USA. But I mean, that's why we have people like you that, of course, is gonna help with that process. Now, when it comes to people get in touch with you, can you briefly touch on maybe your social media, your website, and where people can get in touch if they want to receive the service from you?
Yeah, sure. So our main website is www.rjmtaxexemption.com. So that's our kind of main base. We have a presence on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn as well. So people can reach out there. Obviously, because of our partnership, though, we're going to leave some links below, I
Sure,
believe. And
that's correct. Yeah,
that'll be a specific Calendly booking links if you want to book in for a free consultation with me or the team, or you want to contact us through email. There'll be specific emails with our partnership with e-commerce. And if you go through those links, we will give you a 10% discount on all of our services and our monthly services for life as
that's
well.
correct.
You can go through that way, and obviously the consultation will be free. But feel free to kind of sniff us out. We're on Trustpilot as well. We've got a 5-star Trustpilot review. I think we're up to, I don't know, maybe 110,
That's correct.
120 reviews now.
Very good.
All 5-star reviews so far. I'm
That's
sure
perfect.
people don't get a 5-star review, but quickly check it out now while it looks perfect. And yeah, if you need anything, just reach out.
Well, Reuben, thank you very much. I appreciate it once again, and definitely see you on the next one. Okay, have a nice
Pleasure.
one. Bye bye.